thank you for joining us on platform. I'm sitting in today for the regular anchor, Mohammed Kudu Abubakar, who is unavoidably absent. But I am Ruth Aguele. Let's begin this way. Industrialization is said to be the process by which an economy moves primarily from agrarian production to mass production, technologically advanced goods and services. Now, this is characterized by leaps in productivity, shift from rural to urban labor, and increased standards of living. Now, some experts have come out to say that industrialization is considered the most important economic development in human history. Well, you agree to that or not, but when we talk about industrialization, you ask, is there hope for Africa? Because from 1760 to 1840, the United States transformed from an agrarian society to an industrialized society. In clear terms, there was an industrial revolution. But this is where the African Development Bank comes in. And when we're talking industrialization, because the vision of the AFDB for Africa's industrialization is to contribute to doubling its industrial GDP over the next decade, enhance economic diversification, and to improve competitiveness by fostering successful policies and by promoting and driving enterprise development in Africa. Now, our guest today is someone who is very sound and diverse in the field. When we're talking about industrialization in Africa, please make welcome the Senior Special Advisor on Industrialization to the President of AFDB, Professor Oyebanji Oyeyinka. He has traveled all the way from Abidjan to join us on the program today. And like I would always say, there's no place like home. But let's reel out a little bit of his profile for you. Professor Oyebanji has served at a very high level within the United Nations system for 20 years and still counting. His last positions being Director, Regional Office for Africa, Chief Scientific Advisor, UN Habitat, and Director, Monitoring and Research Division, where he provided intellectual leadership for the UN Habitat flagship reports. Now, this includes State of the World Cities Report and the Global Report on Human Settlements. He also introduced the City Prosperity Index, a monitoring metric for city performance now used in over 400 cities globally. Now, that is huge. He was Senior Economic Advisor, UN Center on Trade and Development, Geneva, where he coordinated the 10-year review of performance of least developed countries. Now, Professor Oyebanji is a cerebral scholar, epitomized distinction and dignity, where he earned global acclaim for his pioneering work in the field of industrialization, technological change, and innovation policy. He is the first Nigerian professor in the field of development, economics, and industrial policy. Now, an interesting part about my guest is that he's also a writer. His books with colleagues include From Consumption to Production, The Why and Ways Out of Failed Industrialization in Nigeria, Rich Country, Poor People, The Story of Nigeria's Poverty in the Midst of Plenty, that was published in 2014. Structural Transformation and Economic Development, Cross-Regional Analysis of Industrialization and Urbanization, amongst others. He is a fellow of the Nigerian Academy of Engineering and fellow Nigerian Academy of Chemical Engineering. Professor Oyebanji holds a Bachelor of Science First Class Honors in Chemical Engineering from the University of Ife, now Obafemi Awolowo University, Masters in Chemical Engineering, University of Toronto, Canada, and Doctor of Philosophy in the Political Economy of Technological Change and Industrialization, University of Sussex, United Kingdom. Now, my guest is not only a writer and someone who is well-versed when we talk about development, industrialization anywhere in the world, but he's also a bookworm. We're pleased to have you join us. Professor, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ruth. I'm glad to be here.
No place like home, right?
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Yes.
So we'll have our panelists join us on the program. I'll start with Mr. Frederick Idehai. He's a financial analyst, media consultant, chairperson, trade business correspondent. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
And we have one lovely face here with us, Amina Nojem from the Business Desk NTA Network. Thank you, Amina, for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so Professor Oyebanji, let me get back to you now. When we talk about industrialization in Africa or anywhere in the world, in clear terms, what are we trying to achieve? And I know that the African Development Bank is targeting agriculture for Africa. Why the focus on agriculture?
Thank you very much, Ruth. You laid it out very clearly in your introduction. All countries throughout all history started in agriculture. Most societies were agrarian, like you said, whether you go back to Britain in the 17th century or United States, continental Europe, they started as agrarian societies. And they began to modernize through industrialization. What does that mean? It means you are changing the forms of production. For example, we are used to hoe and cutlasses in our societies. You begin to leave those behind. You begin to apply mechanical devices to change from human power to horsepower and then to machine power. So you begin to move at greater speed. You begin to lift greater weights because you apply mechanical devices. Agriculture then began to transform, as you said, from very low productivity activity to high productivity. And what does that mean? It means that a job that can be done by one farmer in 1 month, for example, can be done by one combine harvester in 2 hours. So you raise the productivity of both human and the land. Another thing that happens with the transformation from purely agrarian societies is the application, for example, of scientific methods. You use improved varieties of seeds. You use drought resistance, you disease resistant seeds. You began to apply scientific ways to map the land, and then you raise again productivity of the land. Consider, for example, the yield of most crops in Africa. It's about a quarter or a fifth of what applies in Asia now. We're all at the same level 30, 40 years ago. They began to see the sense in modernizing or industrializing agriculture. This was what led to what we call the Green Revolution in Asia, simply by doing those things that we are raising here. So why should we concern ourselves about agriculture? Because you have to be food secure. In our country today, many children are malnourished. They are stunted. Children are not given the proper nutrition because food prices are high. A country like Nigeria, up until now, was spending $22 billion importing food. Africa has 65% of all arable land in the world today, but they just lie fallow. People crowd into cities without jobs. Therefore, we need to return back to agriculture, not as we used to know it, but agribusiness. We need to industrialize the way we do agriculture.
Now,
this is why we need to go back to
okay, and we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution. Mm-hmm. Now, I know that the AFDB is also promoting agro-industrial processing zones. Now, what exactly is that all about?
Thank you very much. So, one of the big disincentives to private investment in what we call agribusiness is the lack of infrastructure. When, for example, a business person comes to a particular geographic space in our country, say, for example, outside of Abuja here, or outside of Kaduna, Kano, outside of Oyo State, they go 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers down into the hinterland, there's no facility, no hospital, no school, no roads, no rail, no power. So what the Special Agro-Industrial Zone wants to do is to use this zone approach to correct these deficiencies, what you call infrastructural deficits. So we go there, we map out a zone, mostly what we call secondary cities. In urban terms, the primary cities are the capital cities. Then you have secondary cities, beyond the main cities. So we put roads, power, water, And then you make sure you link up farmers from the wider geographic area to those areas. And then you save the private sector the headache of having to produce or provide these funds by themselves. Once you do that, you begin to see private farms begin to locate within that zone. This is the strategy. I'm sure you're aware of normal free economic zones. The model is not so much different, but in the particular case of special agro-industrial zones, we focus on 4 areas: agriculture, forestry, livestock, and fisheries. It will interest you, for example, even Nigeria still imports fish. We have rivers all over the place. We import chocolate. We are the 5th exporter of cocoa beans, but we don't process them. So 2 things need to happen. We convert those zones to areas where people are able to process and where yields of these crops begin to rise. This is the model for the special agro-industrial zones.
So in clear terms, it's a declaration of state of emergency when we're talking agricultural industrialization. So let me allow my colleagues here to come in. Frederick?
Yes, Prof. When you started analyzing some things or reeling out some of the things you just said out now, I was overwhelmed. But the question here is, where did Nigeria get it wrong? And what will your professional advice be to the country in order for it to catch up with all these Asian countries that Nigeria, even some of these Asian countries that Nigeria even started before them? Yeah. What is your advice to the managers of the economy in order for us to catch up or in a way bridge the gap at this moment?
Thank you very much. You spoke about catching up. In the late 70s and mid 80s, we made tremendous effort to industrialize agriculture. For example, textile is part of agro-industry, because textile, fashion all arise from cotton. You went to Funtua, you went to Zamfara, you went to Kaduna in those days. United Textiles used to employ over 1 million people. Many people have forgotten. Arewa Textiles. When you go to Lagos, Aswani Market and all those markets, these were centers where we were producing. So you ask me, we have to go back to that. We have to go back to using our comparative advantage. As I said, we have huge arable land. We got it wrong because we thought oil was all in all. Last year, 2018, the total revenue from oil was $30 billion. The agricultural contribution to America's GDP is $1 trillion, more than double Nigeria's overall GDP. Last year, 2018, the Netherlands, in a one small subsector of manufacturing, foods alone, they exported $90 billion. That's 3 times what we got from oil. Brazil cultivates only 8.8% of its land. They are feeding 1.2 billion people. We estimate from the bank that by 2030, agribusiness will be worth $1 trillion. Now, let me shock you with another figure. Globally, agribusiness is about $8 trillion. Do you know that the IT sector is worth about $1 trillion? Well, less than 1/8. The auto industry is about 0.8 trillion. The IT, iron and steel industry, about the same. But people don't pay attention to all of these things you eat every day on aircrafts, in shops, everywhere. This is where the money is. Where you want to make millionaires and billionaires in Africa in the next 10, 20 years. And this is what my president, Dr. Adesina, is preaching. Agriculture, that's where we should go back to. Not the way we used to do it. We modernize agriculture, industrialize agriculture. And we were able also to employ thousands and thousands of young people when we make it attractive as a practice and as a business.
Okay, Amina, I know you want to come in now.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say, based on what you have been saying, that industrialization is closely related to investment.
Yeah.
Now, coming from your background, how would you describe Nigeria's investment policy in order to drive industrialization?
Thanks, Amina. You know, a few days ago, I was with a minister here, and he was shaking his head. He said, Prof, there is no shortage of ideas. People like you have given ideas several times in the past. Our investment policy are based on our national plans. But how do we implement it in a correct way? That had been the problem. Nigeria in the 70s, 80s went on the path of import substitution. In fact, the correct one would be import replication. You know, to look at a product and put it apart, and then use, you know, technological means to replicate that product, so that you don't import it anymore. You know, that's one of the investment ideas that we had. Other countries used it very well, and they succeeded. The Asians started with import substitution industrialization, and then moved to export-oriented industrialization. Because when you begin to master the techniques of production, you become specialized. When the Japanese, the Chinese, the Koreans started making cars, we used to laugh at them. I'm sure you remember. Oh, nobody wants to buy a Japanese car. You want to buy some European car. But you specialize. I want to use investment promotion in a different way. We focused a lot on direct foreign investment coming to our country. Yes, but we need to make the environment conducive.
Yes.
And also, over time, make sure you create the absorptive capacity to also gain the capability, so that in a few years, you can begin to make these things by yourself. I give you an example. The Nigerian iron and steel industry was set up at the same time with the Poyang steel plant in Korea. In fact, precisely 1971. One was 1971, one was 1971. Today, the revenue from Poyang steel plant is over $60 billion. The Ajakuta that we set up has never taken off the ground, because we didn't master the techniques, we didn't even get them off the ground. So, how do we use investment promotion? For me, it's about gaining technological capabilities.
You've talked about infrastructure.
Yeah.
Well, and there's been new frontiers to boost public-private partnerships. Now, in expanding the scope of industrialization, I know the AFDB is also looking at two strategic pillars, that is Feed Africa and Industrialize Africa. Now, how can this be implemented in Nigeria?
Yeah, thank you very much. In fact, this is what we are pushing in the special agro zones. It's government-backed by the rules, by the incentive system that we put in place, by government doing what governments are supposed to do, build roads, mark out where people should live, where people should not live, enforce the rules. When people invest, you create the rules that ensure that they are comfortable. But we want to make sure that these zones are led by private sectors. In fact, we have approached almost all the big farms in Nigeria who are involved in agribusiness in this process of trying to create the environment to make sure this goes smoothly and we don't destroy it like we've done so many things. We've spoken with all of them, and they are on board to lead as anchor investors in all of the zones. So the idea is that the PPP, on the one hand, for the productive part of it, production, also PPP, even for infrastructure. We will welcome, for example, if a company wants to build a 10 megawatt plant in a particular place, we welcome facility managers who will manage these zones. We welcome those, for example, who want to do sanitation. This is how you create jobs. Government should not get too involved with, because of its own bureaucratic nature. Some of it may be expected, because you want to also safeguard certain things. But the private-led model is what we want to push in all the zones.
Let me come in here a bit. You're talking about all these plants.
Yes.
Let's talk funding.
Yes.
Where does the finance come from?
Yes.
Recently, we had the central bank literally reading the Riot Act, lend to the real sector. and less to government. So how does that all tie in into this agenda?
Thank you very much. So the approach of the central bank is consistent with what we are also doing. We believe that when government provide the enabling environment, private sector actors will come in. I give you an example. In the recently concluded Africa Investment Forum, which is a vision of Dr. Adesina, which we started last year, in 72 hours, we raised $40.1 billion. Most of these monies are coming from African investors. In other words, people feel safe to do business with the bank because it's a triple-rated bank and they know that their money is safe. So this is really what you are saying. Mr. Methile probably is saying, look, let's lend to the real sector, which is manufacturing, because that's what drives industrialization.
Is the SMEs also inclusive?
Yes.
Okay.
All firms, large, medium, small, will be included. In fact, one of the emphasis we are going to put is that you must take care of the small players.
Yes, I'm equally interested in the agriculture free zone. You made mention of free zone. Can you explain more on that, and as well as link it up to how it's going to benefit the small and medium enterprise agencies? Or
Thank you.
Small and medium enterprises.
So you have small and medium enterprises, both in purely agribusiness and also in what you normally regard as industry. I'm advisedly using, the people classify industry simply just as a sector. Industry also means a set of techniques to do things. For example, when you set up a zone, you will need companies that do repairs, that supply basic, daily machine tools, and so repair companies. Most of them are small and medium. You would need them. On the farming side also, you need small farmers. And the job of this special economic zone is to ensure that all of these small, poor farmers today, in 10 years' time, they become modern farmers that are now using modern techniques, that are able to afford tractors, that are able to afford harvesters, that are now knowledgeable, hiring people with knowledge. We hope that at every zone we have, tens of thousands of people doing agricultural business in a different way.
Now, I know the whole essence is to transform the economy into a capital-intensive, from labor-intensive. Now, if we must exploit these opportunities you're talking about, let's look at the local producers, these farmers. In what areas would they be benefiting from? Because some of them are still lagging behind when we're talking about packaging, processing, for export.
Part of the whole process, and if we want to succeed, is to make sure that we carry them along. If you go to, like I say, secondary cities, for example, outside of the urban areas, most of the farmers you find are small. Most of them are probably even just barely literate. So as a part of the evolutionary nature of these things, you have to engage with them in learning over time. And of course also infuse younger blood into those space. One of the things that happens when you build special zones is that it basically transforms into an agro-industrial towns. So this will be for us an explicit actually policy to also invite people who do housing and so forth, affordable housing.
Fine. The role of commodity exchanges in world market cannot be overemphasized. Now, are you in any way liaising with the Nigerian Commodity Exchange? Because they play a very significant role in terms of, buying off products from farmers and ensuring that these goods are not wasted. The agricultural products are not wasted. So are you having any kind of collaboration with them to ensure that we use them as a means of actualizing our industrial, drive?
No, thank you. This is a conversation we've been having with colleagues who are involved in, commodity exchange, for example. One of the big problems of agriculture in Nigeria and many other countries is post-harvest losses. So, as part of the whole package of a structural legacy like special agro zones, we're going to be building facilities, for example, that will ensure that farmers get the best fair price for their goods. One model, for example, is when farmers produce, people wait and they know that these goods are going to get spoiled, and then they give them whatever price they want. So we are going to create situations whereby there will be storage facilities. There are models where people give some farmers some advance funding when the time for this particular goods are due. They get fair price for their produce.
You are talking about fair price.
Yeah.
The issue of the challenge, rather, of the middleman is what comes in when you think of pricing. Now, are you planning to be on ground to check that there are no abuses, to check the activities of middlemen?
So you find that the middleman is cut off when you begin to build these zones. Farmers are able to approach our agro-transformation centers by themselves. We want to form farmers into cooperatives, into associations. We've seen a few models actually. In fact, there was a gentleman that we were studying what he did in Cross River. He actually formed a farmers micro bank. And he told me that he'd never had a single default among almost 20,000 farmers. Okay. So we tend to underestimate the intelligence of these people. Okay. So the models are there for us to build upon. It's not as if nothing is happening. Like I said earlier, we want to build on brownfields. We are not going to go into green fields where nothing has happened before. We are identifying areas where people are already doing activities, and then we build the zones around them to enhance productivity and also to...
Okay, let's look at Nigeria as a case study.
Yeah.
We are a population estimated to be 200 million.
Yeah.
Now, I want to key into your Feed Africa, Industrialize Africa. And the clamor has been there for human capital to be developed to boost productivity. Now, a lot of times people run away from this agriculture. But the good news, this administration is really pushing, diversification policy for agriculture. But how do we begin to look at, the economic transformational plans in terms of creating policies for an enhanced, sustainable industrial transformation that we're talking about? If we must make the agri sector attractive for more people to come in, if we say we want to feed Africa and industrialize Africa through agriculture?
No, thank you. You touched on a very important point, which is human capital development. One of the motivations for doing it is actually to ensure that we raise the metrics. Nigeria has, and I don't like talking negative about Nigeria because it touches me personally. We have one of the worst medical and human capital metrics in the world. We want to raise this, and most of them are within these secondary cities, several secondary cities, and which you are all familiar with. Every day, 500 women die from childbirth. Why? Because they have no livelihood. Sometimes because they don't just have money to buy the basic things. We've seen people die of malaria. Why? Because they don't have a decent wage. So we want to create a situation where within these zones, in fact, the whole strategy is to change the whole landscape of poverty that we see in our secondary cities, so that people can even stay there. Sometimes you go to Lagos, you go to places like Agege, Okwoba, and all that. It's really frightening in the morning. And you wonder, where do these people live? You see, the density of people it's just too much. So many people sleeping in one room. So part of raising the human capital, and that's the 5th pillar of the Africa Development Bank, is to raise the quality of life of Africans, is to create this platform for people so that they can have decent income, they can have decent life, and then they can escape this crushing poverty and inequities that you find in cities, and live a life that is worth living. So human capital, we believe, will be raised when people have jobs, when there is an environment where people can, do what nature has created them to be. Like I said earlier on, one of the things you will find when special agro zones begin to spring up is that you now have facilities for schooling, hospitals, and so forth. They will automatically spring up in all of these spaces without even government intervention. Private people will begin to locate there because there are people who off-take. People who want to do housing will go there because they are off-takers. So these are the things we also want to promote, using specific policies to push them, to ensure that affordable housing, affordable care, healthcare, and so forth, reach all of the people who are working in these places.
Okay, Prof, let me take you to African Free Trade Agreements.
Yes.
When the president finally signed that agreement, there was celebration world over, not just in Africa, because of the importance of Nigeria being a very large market. The second phase of this agreement, of the investment protocol, of which Nigeria is, the negotiation commences early next year. Yes, I'm talking about the investment component of the African Free Trade Zone, commencing early next year. How prepared is Nigeria? And when the country has not even, successfully ratified the first phase of this, African Free Trade Agreement. Then, before you answer, Prof, I still want to ask, with the border closure, do you think the aim of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement will not be defeated?
Thank you, Fred. I want to believe that the border closure is a short-term instrument to correct certain anomalies between our neighbors. I understand that there's been a committee set up, for example, among all the countries involved, Niger, Nigeria, Benin, to resolve the issues. Sometime in the history of every country, you have to take some actions. Yes. There will be winners, there will be losers, but and I believe this is probably one of those kinds of things. And really, when you look into history, all the countries today who preach free market, they use tariffs in a very strong way. There's a book written by a friend of mine called Kicking Away the Ladder. It's a book you should read when you have to. It's by Hajun Chan, and it showed through historical, very systematic history, that all these countries, at some point or the other, close their door, whether through physical or through just trade barriers. But we shouldn't do that among African countries. In fact, the barriers to trade in Africa is higher than that between us and Europe. The tariffs between individual African countries ourselves is far more than you have with Europe. Again, maybe because of historical ties to our colonial masters and all that. This is the issue that you are raising on the Africa trade area, that I want to believe that, now with government now setting up its own machinery, that will begin to quicken up this process. And all of us have the, we need to help them, I know the African Development Bank provided a lot of money, in fact, even for the setting up of the, for the Secretariat of the Africa Trade Area in Ghana. And we are doing a lot of trade facilitation instruments and so forth. So this is an area that I know my colleagues are working with some people in government.
Now, Prof, you're talking about regional trade. Yes. Something comes to mind.
Yeah.
Within the African continent, there are some countries that are concentrating on increasing production by reducing value-added tax. Now, this is coming at a time when Nigeria is thinking of increasing value-added tax. Do you see this as an obstacle towards this agenda?
Yeah, I'm sure you are referring to Ghana, for example.
Yes, I'm talking about Ghana.
Yeah. Well, the countries have their own specific context. I think that we should widen the tax net rather than raising taxes. And this is my personal opinion, not the bank, not the African Development Bank. We should widen the tax net with fair taxation, and let it be seen that government is actually using taxation for development. One of the reasons that most people try to avoid taxation is because they tell themselves that I'm already taxed. And it's the truth. Many of us sitting here, you build your own house, you build your own borehole, you build your own street, you have your own borehole and all that. That's some form of indirect taxation. So this is an anomaly that we need to correct going forward. I always believe that the country can transform in 10 years. When you look at what China has done, we can change this country in 10 years, completely.
Yes, we can. And if we're keen into what China has done, they, use what they produce, and which is part of the, the whole essence of the border closure. Because some farmers, I know, are already counting their blessings when we're talking rice production, and even poultry farmers too. But let me take you back now. If we're going to fast-track this industrialization process with focus in Nigeria, now, what kind of synergy is the AFDB leveraging on with development partners? Because I know when there is interventions, there are bound to be challenges. So what is the synergy like? How are you tackling some of these challenges?
Thank you very much. The bank has many partners. At the first level are the other development banks. We are working very, very closely with other global development banks. Many of them actually invest in Africa Development Bank. We are working with National Development Bank like BOI, for example, Bank of Industry. As you know, the Wednesday before this last one, the Minister of Finance actually read out a statement announcing the 500 million euros for Bank of Industry, which I'm told will ratchet up to $750 million. The bulk of it is actually going into special agro-industrial zones. This has been as a result of consultations among ourselves. As I said to you earlier, we have talked to also the Afri-Exim Bank. They are going to be co-financing with us, both here in Nigeria and in other African countries. As I said, we are in about 15 countries now doing these special agro zones. Ethiopia we are building 4 at the same time. South Africa, they have 9 they are building. In Kenya, 6. In Botswana and all these other countries. They are building them at speed. And this is as a result of partnership with other banks, other partners, development institutions. In the case of Ethiopia, for example, there are so many people involved. DFID is involved. The Korean Exim Bank loaned them about, at a very low interest rate, about $70 million. So this is because the bank is present. This is because the African Development Bank is present in that process. This is one of the convening powers that the bank has because of its reputation to be able to attract other partners. And this we want to also do in Nigeria.
Yes, Prof, I'm aware that there is an agro-investment model designed to target about 6 geopolitical zones of the country. Can you give us a breakdown and explanation on that?
Yeah. So what we have done currently is to look at Nigeria as a whole. We have drawn circles around certain states based on 3 criteria. One is, what are the comparative advantage in terms of crops and other commodities within these particular geographic areas? What is the most important food security crop that we need to deal with that are penalizing us in terms of import bills now? And what is this geographic contiguity that will help this particular circle? So what we have 6 zones. We have in the northwest, Katsina, Kano, Jigawa, Kaduna. We have northeast. We have in south, we have Edo, Enugu, Anambra. Like I said, some of them cut across, for example, southeast, south. because it's not based on purely political zonal arrangements, but they are based on very technical details that we are developing. So you have in the southwest, you have Ogun, Lagos, Ondo, Oyo, Osun, Ekiti. In zone 4, you have Niger, Kogi, FCT, Kwara, Kebbi. In zone 5, you have Benue, Cross River, Ebonyi. In zone 6, you have Bauchi, Adamawa, Gombe, Borno. So almost every state in this country, we believe, will be covered based on their comparative advantage. In some states, it will be livestock, it will be fishery.
Okay, the commodities vary.
The commodities vary across all the states, all the zones. So we have clusters of states making up a zone. And our idea is that in now locating the industrial hub, we now link them with the necessary infrastructure to access, open up those spaces.
Do you have a time frame for this? And in the long term, how is it sustained?
So we have, we are in a hurry. This is why we chose the idea of brownfields, because we also know that tenure of governments have its own tenure limitations. We want to be able to show results as quickly as possible in the next 18 to 24 months, so that, you see, demonstration effect can be very powerful. When you see something working, more success will follow. This is the aim. So we have that time scale, in our mind when we are doing all of this, and this is the message we are passing to all the key actors. Governors, ministers have gone around everybody to tell them we don't want any accident anymore. Where projects are developed, they're about to take off, and then somebody comes and simply just wipes out works of months and months. The last administration, before this, one of the zones was in Kogi State. Cargill had brought $100 million. The factory was already being done. USAID, DFID, World Bank was going to put $200-300 million. It's a big zone for cassava, for all of that. But all of that just went through the roof because of these things that happen in our country, and we want to avoid that.
Yes, definitely. Prof, this is a very noble initiative. But how will this support the government foreign direct investment drive?
Yes, like I said, one of the aims of creating a zone is to sort of incentivize private people to locate. In fact, in our criteria for selecting, for example, is a facility manager. We want those with global reach who will be able to open up space for our exports. We want those who have global reach who will be able to say for us, look, I have clients who want so and so and so in the Netherlands, in Asia, in wherever. So we believe that this will crowd in a lot of foreign investment once the zones are operating.
Are you putting into context the issue of standardization? Because it is on record that some of our products have been rejected for various reasons. Is this part of your plan?
In fact, the agriculture transformation centers will have certification centers, metrology standards, one-stop registration centers. So the idea is to create virtually a whole city by itself. So certification is very important. Otherwise, we lose out a lot in the export market. And this is what we need to gain back.
All right, we can talk about industrialization and not look at digital infrastructure. What kind of support, would the ICT, bring in industrializing agriculture?
The fourth industrial revolution has several components that, in fact, they are already being used. About 3 weeks ago, I was in Tunis to give a lecture on how drones are being used for the Africa Development Bank is working with KOAFEC, Korean Fund for Development, to introduce drones because they are using it very actively in their country. So we have used Tunisia, for example, as a test case to see how drones can be used to map large geographic areas. and it was a fantastic success. I can share with you the PowerPoint that we did. Now, one of the decisions that came out of the completion workshop is that we're going to have such thing here in Nigeria. We're going to have a 4IR, Fourth Industrial Revolution workshop here next year, hopefully February. And I'm hoping that you will be part of this to show how agriculture is a modern business.
Yes.
And truly, this is the point. You know, I went to a factory, I call it a factory, in Seoul, right in the middle of the urban area, in Seoul. And actually, there's one here in Abuja, a young lady. They have an urban farm. The whole area is no more than 1 acre. The revenue generation for that company last year was $45 million. There's no soil. It's hydroponic science. They just have all these trays arranged up to like maybe the height of this place, half the height of this place actually. They grow urban vegetables, high value vegetables, cabbage, and all those things. And they are all run by young people. The MD was telling me that their revenue for last year was $45 million, and they are bound to surpass that this year. You know, so the digital economy is, you know, agriculture will benefit tremendously from digital economy, whether it's AI, big data, drones technology. They are all being applied to. One of the benefits of drones, for example, in agriculture, is an area that ordinarily humans have not reached before. They discovered a large pool of underground water in one of the outside the cities of Tunisia that they never thought existed. But because these drones have very high resolution cameras, they're able to go down deep into the ground and we're able to mine them.
What about fertilizers? Will they be incorporated?
Yes, okay. Fertilizer is a big one of the measures of underdevelopment. If you plot your graph, one of the huge correlations between GDP per capita and fertilizer use, when you see a country, I can tell you without even knowing, with my eyes closed, I'll tell you this country is underdeveloped when I see their fertilizer use per capita. So fertilizer is important, but applied in the right way to the right place. You know, so in addition to mechanization, and I'm happy that the government of the day is doing a lot. They've been reviving a lot of the fertilizer blending plants that were dead. And
they're collaborating with other neighboring countries. Yeah.
Yes, phosphate from Morocco. They've been reviving many of them. Hopefully, Dangote fertilizer will come on stream in the next year. Nigeria will be a net exporter of fertilizer. And then we are able now to offer fertilizer more cheaply to our farmers. So for me, I see a positive narrative for Nigeria going forward.
Okay, Prof, we're about to round off, and I don't know if Amina or Frederick has the final question, but let me throw this to you. Let's paint a picture here. You've mentioned 10 years from now. What do you see for Nigeria if we're talking industrialization for agri in the next 10 years?
What I see is a country that is applying modern technologies. If we do this right, I see a country in 2030, our population is going to be hovering around 300 million. By 2050, it will be 410 million. In fact, by 2100, Nigeria will be 1 billion people. I see a country that is rescuing itself from all these failures of the past. I want to see a country where agribusiness is run by young people. I want to see a country where there's no more Boko Haram, there's no more fighting in our rural areas, where Borno, Adamawa, everywhere is lush with agribusiness. This is what I would like to see. And I'm sure, I know it's possible. Men make their own history. History is not automatic. You have to make your own history, you know. And this is what I see.
Fine. You made mention of...
very briefly?
Yes, very brief. I mean, automotive sector being key to Nigerian industrialization. Don't you think Nigeria needs an enabling law to encourage investors into that sector?
Perfectly. I agree with you. We have to. Otherwise, people don't come. One of the fears is that they come here, everything is modeled, they don't understand. We need an enabling law.
Okay.
All right.
It's difficult to talk about industrialization without talking about manufacturing. Looking ahead, do you see things changing with more funds?
Yeah. And I think this is the starting place. You know, you have to make a distinction between industrial sector and the manufacturing sector. Industrial sector includes mining and all of that. The manufacturing center is actually the core of industrialization. I see that if we pay attention, our manufacturing contribution to GDP has remained stagnant under 10% for almost 30 years. If we do what we want to do here, I believe that will change for the better.
Thank you very much, Professor Oyebanji Oyeyinka. And we've been talking about industrialization in Nigeria and Africa at large. Thank you very much. He is the Senior Special Advisor on Industrialization to the President of AFDB, that is African Development Bank. It's been nice having you here. We hope you stay a little more in Nigeria before you go back to Abidjan.
Thank you, Ruth.
Okay, I also want to thank our panelists, Amina Nojan. Thank you very much from NTA Network Business Desk. Thank you. Your contributions have been really nice. And also Mr. Frederick Idahi. Okay, I got that now. He's a financial analyst and media consultant, chairperson, trade business correspondent. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, and we have been talking about industrialization. Yes, experts have come out to say industrialization is considered the most important economic development in human history. And our guests have also listed some of the benefits we can really tap into if we're talking agricultural revolution, agricultural industrialization. There's so much to harness for Nigeria, especially with our population. This has been Platform for today. Thank you for being a part of it. I am Ruth Aguele. See you some other time. Bye.